Hello everyone, welcome to Cloud World. So today, before we go back into the Azure side, we are going to be talking about DAPR. So this topic is going to be pretty important because in the next videos we are going to be working once more with the Azure Container App tooling. But in this case, we are going to be working all together with the DAPR microservices and interactions. So this video will be focused on that. We will learn what is DAPR. We will see a couple of examples of the resources that we can use with it. So let's get started. So DAPR is actually a framework that you can install pretty easily in your local environment or into a Kubernetes cluster or any type of Docker compatible environment. And this tool is going to allow you to use a variety of programming languages like Node, Go, Python, of course .NET, as we love in this channel. But you will have options like Java, C++, and PHP, and even Rust in case you have an acceptance for those. Well, DAPR is going to include all the tools that are required to build successful applications in 2024 and even in the close future, because this is not only going to allow you to write easily applications that interact between the components pretty easily, but you will be able to create software that can interact as a microservice architecture. So I'm going to give you a quick example. When you write a microservice-oriented architecture, you usually write one or more services that are pretty isolated, and each one of those have a particular task. It is very common when you need to have communication between two or more different components of those. You will need to use something in the middle to interact between those components. So you usually build a service bus or some kind of HTTP protocol communication between those services in order to exchange information. Now think that DAPR is going to be that framework that is going to allow you to build all those distributed applications pretty easily. Also, you will have advanced tools in order to create things like publish and subscribes, workflows. You will be able to manage the state of your application in a single place. You will be able to choose between actors in your communication, store secrets, configuration, and stuff like that. Because at the end, DAPR is going to be very familiar with Kubernetes. And if you remember in the past videos, we spoke about the Azure Container Apps, which in the end is actually just Kubernetes running into the background. So this is why this is pretty easy to integrate with. DAPR also comes with a set of tools that allow you to easily manage observability, security, and resiliency. And the best thing is that you can deploy this kind of application mostly anywhere that you would like to have. It could be in Azure, as we are going to see on this series of videos, but you can move into the AWS cloud as well, Google Cloud, Alibaba, Kubernetes, and even a local infrastructure. You have bare metal services. You can set up everything using VMs or a Kubernetes cluster in your local environment, or even just a Docker environment exposed throughout the internet. So one of the most greatest things that DAPR has is that you will be able to communicate between two services pretty easily. The communication between those services will happen through HTTP or GCPR protocol, and this will allow flawless communication between those two services. So you can easily send information to the service A into the service B just using the DNS. This is also one of the greatest things that DAPR also include as part of this ecosystem. Everything will be running together like it was in a single infrastructure, and you will be able to make requests between those services just by using the custom name that you expose to that service. So let's suppose that your service A is the user service and the service B is your card service. If the card service would like to retrieve information for the user service, he could be able to use DAPR and make HTTP requests to retrieve information pretty easily. And the best thing, everything will be encrypted in the middle, so all the information that travels between those services is fully secure. One of the things that also DAPR is going to include, it will be the autonomy to be able to write applications that publish and subscribe messages. So if you are already familiar with microservices-oriented architecture, you will know that we usually interact with components using a publish and subscribe design. So that means one part of the application will be creating messages. Those messages will be sent into a middle service bus or an enterprise bus, and it will be a subscriber or a consumer as well in the other side. So if you follow the past videos, we already did something similar with Event Hub and also with Azure Service Bus. Those two can be perfect example of enterprise service bus that can be used to exchange and publish and subscribe information. Well, think about this. DAPR is going to give you all of the box, the implementation to use this kind of resources. So you could have a service that publishes messages in the left and send those messages throughout DAPR, and DAPR is going to send those messages to the pub subcomponent. That component could be, for example, a Redis cluster and service bus. And from the Azure side, of course, we have the service bus and the event hub services. You will be able also to configure pretty easily the subscribers, as you can see on the right of the image, and the subscriber will be consuming those messages that are sent into the pub subcomponents. This will make things pretty easily. One of the things that you also will have advantage to is that with DAPR you will be able to easily write workflows. I want you to think about the workflows as something that it can allow you to combine different building blocks throughout the application and define different tasks in order to complete something. So you could have like a activity number 1, which launch activity number 2 and number 3, and that can segregate the result of those activities into a single output. So this will allow you to separate very complex tasks into smaller ones and try to follow up the result into a single output. So this will allow you to combine the data outputs, flows of data, and spawn between multiple services in a single place. So let's go back into the example of a shopping cart. At some point, when the user makes a request, you would like to check that the inventory actually has the item that the user has requested. And at the same time, you would like to process the billing and also to charge the user using his credit card. That will be a workflow. You add items into your cart, you specify the items that you would like to buy, and you proceed to the checkout. You provide some basic information, and from there some things start the process. From there, everything could happen as part of the workflow. One part will be taking care of making the initial request, another part will be doing the check of the inventory, and if the inventory has everything that you requested to, there will be another 2 processes, one to charge the credit card and another one to proceed to create all the legal billing that is usually attached to a buy that you do on the internet. So you can do that pretty simple with DAPR. Also, DAPR is going to provide some additional tools like state management, resource bindings, actors, secrets, configuration, distribute, log, cryptography, and jobs to deploy. But for today's video, we are going to leave it just as PubSub and workflow, because this will be the initial topics that we are going to be covering in the Azure Container Apps section. Well, one of the things to understand is when you work with DAPR, you can easily do it locally as well, because DAPR exposes a CLI that you can easily install in your local environment. I will drop the link into the description in case you want to set up the DAPR CLI locally to start building these applications pretty easily. All you will need to have is Docker or Podman or something similar in your local environment, because when you initialize DAPR in the standard way, he is going to pull out some containers from the container registry directly and is going to initialize some containers in your local environment. One of the most important containers that are going to be created from the Docker perspective, it will be the sidecar one. The sidecar one is the one that holds all the infrastructure logic and the connectivity between DAPR components. And this component and sidecar is going to be the one that will be helpful in order to redirect messages between services, interact the component between the PubSub, and try to share the things like the state of the application, share bindings and everything. So having this sidecar is actually pretty important, and it's going to be there when you deploy a DAPR application. With the containers as well, you will have things like Zipkin, which is a tracing tool, which is going to allow you to easily follow up what your application is doing. Since DAPR, of course, could be used to build a very complex application, tools like Zipkin will allow you to follow up the traces since the beginning of the request into the end throughout the different components. We will see that throughout the demo when we work in the Azure Container Apps and how to interact with the Zipkin tool in order to understand the flow that is happening in your application. But as you can see, everything got centralized into the Docker side. Just take a look into the left. DAPR is going to schedule job, take part of the placement of actors. He's going to handle the state of the application as well. And your application is going to be sitting in the middle between the DAPR and the Docker containers and the components state that you can have, like the state store, the PubSub components, and the other ones we already spoke of. One of the things is that DAPR can be easily deployed outside of your local environment, of course, using things like Kubernetes. So you could have a standard cluster and you can deploy the DAPR tooling as well and run all the sidecar application as part of it. DAPR allows you to mostly do a very easy setup using the kubelet tooling and the DAPR tool just to install this tool into your Kubernetes cluster and have everything ready to go to deploy DAPR applications. Of course, if you remember, with the Kubernetes tooling, that means we can easily work with the Azure Container Apps. Container Apps, as we mentioned before, is going to remove all the maintenance that you have to do in a Kubernetes cluster. So with Container Apps, we are going to have the chance to easily enable the DAPR infrastructure because the Azure portal already has everything set up for us. We only have to toggle it on or off according to the need that we have. And once we have DAPR enabled, we'll be able to deploy anything into it. So deploying an application is going to be very simple, and the Azure infrastructure is going to take care of creating our application containers and also the sidecar that travel together between the applications. So if we take a look into the screen right now, we have two container apps, the publisher app and the subscriber app as an example in here. We expose different ports throughout the HTTP protocol, and we give something that is the app ID. We are going to explore that in the implementation in the next video, but the app ID is very crucial because that will be the unique identifier for your application. As you can see, for each one of the applications that you will have the DAPR sidecar sitting between those containers. But in the right, we have the components that are going to be connecting that application. So for example, the component could be a service bus, and the service bus will be the one taking messages and redirecting those messages to the different component in a pub sub architecture. In here we could have Azure Redis Cache, we could have also Azure Event Hub, and for manage the state we could have things like Redis Cache and Cosmos DB. They are out-of-the-box support from the Azure side, so it is not too complicated to integrate in your application. So for that, we have for the state management Cosmos DB, blob storage, stable storage, and Microsoft SQL Server. For the pub sub, we have the bus queues and the service topics and the event hubs. For bindings, we have the storage queues for the both the service bus and the storage one, and we also have the capability to interact with the blob storage and event hubs as well. In case you want to manage your application secrets, you will be easily capable to integrate the DAPR with Keyvault in Azure. Okay, now let's take a sneak peek into the Azure portal into the DAPR configuration. So we are right now, I am in the container app that we created on the past videos. And as part of the Blaze on the left, we have the settings configuration, and in here you will be able to easily enable DAPR. In this video, I'm just going to give you like a quick overview of the requirements that you are asked to fulfill when deploying an application in DAPR in the Azure portal. But of course, as always on the next video, we are going to be enable DAPR using the CLI, which of course you can do. But just to summarize for the first video, as you can see, when we enable DAPR, we can give a name to app ID. So remember, for each one of the applications that we deploy into the container app, that is going to be a single representation of a microservice or an application itself. So let's suppose this Azure Container Apps is going to be the microservice for something else. So we can enter the app ID, the name of the microservice. As part of the app port, remember that we need to use the same port that is deployed as part of the container app into the Docker file, and we usually expose the port 8080 by default when running .NET applications. In case you are exposing another port, you need to specify that one in here, or if you are working with another programming language, make sure to check in your Docker file which port is being exposed to your application. As part of the protocols, you can use HTTP or gRPC in order to communicate with your application. You can choose whatever flavor works the most for you, and based on the configurations that you like to use, whatever is JSON or protobuf, one or the other is going to suit better for your case. You can set up a couple of constraints in case you don't want the messages to be too big throughout the application, and this is mostly to control the flow of data between one application and the other one and avoid any issues in terms of performance. You can easily enable the API login in case you want to. And once you have the DAPR container enabled in here, you will be able to associate components to it. Remember, a component could be something like the Azure Service Bus or similar. So when you deploy the application, adding a component like a Service Bus, it will allow your application to easily interact with that component. So we will do that in the next video. Okay, so this is everything for the intro for DAPR. So make sure to join me on the next video when we are going to start seeing the first application written in DAPR. We are going to see a quick example locally. And after that, as always, we are going to be publishing the images of the work into the Azure Container Registry. and then deploy those applications into 2 different container apps, which we are going to be connecting each other using the DAPR framework. So thank you for joining me today, and see you in the next video.